Welcome back. In this video, we're going to create our project, compile our project for the first time, and tweak a little bit about the project before we get started. So first, we'll open the editor. And the new project browser will come up, or the project browser will show up, and we can click on the New Project tab. Here we've got the list of all the templates available to you. Really, you could start with things like the code first person, or even the, say, rolling template, but I want to start with the code third person template. I just want to be able to start with a character that's already got movement and jumping controls. So that's the template I'm going to use. I will go ahead and include starter content, and I'm going to name my project Tutorial Code. Now click on Create Project, and the project's actually going to open for the first time in Visual Studio, or Xcode if you're on a Mac. So I'm working in Windows here, but if you're on a Mac, don't worry, just there are compiling instructions for the Mac in the documentation, and really that's the main difference you're going to have to think about while you're following along with this tutorial. So as you can see, the project is loaded in Visual Studio, and we have to compile once before we can load the project in the editor. But before we do that, let's actually just take a minute and see what all is included in our new code project. So over here in the Solution Explorer, you can see the project listed as Tutorial Code. And if you expand this, you see there's 3 folders. Config holds our configuration files, right? If you need to set any settings for your game, for your input, this should be where those files live. External dependencies actually has all of the headers of the engine. So when you create a new actor or create a new character and need to include that header, that's where those live. And finally, the folder that you're going to be working with most through this tutorial is the source folder. So in the source folder, you'll see another folder that's named the same as your project. It's Tutorial Code. But this is actually your gameplay module. We just automatically name it the same thing as your project. So if you open this folder, you'll see some code files. You've got your character header and source file. You've got your game mode header and source file. And then you've got your module header and source file, which just have some basic rules about how to use your module with your project. So this tutorial code folder is where any code that you add to the project during the course of this tutorial is going to be saved. So now that we've sort of seen the files that are all here, let's compile and be ready to load our project up in the editor. First, there are 2 things to make sure that they're set correctly: the solution configuration and the solution platform. If you don't see both of these, there's a little drop down at the end of the toolbar with add or remove buttons showing as an option. And from there, just make sure that both solution configurations and solution platforms are checked, especially if this is the first time you're using Visual Studio. So solution configurations is this first drop down. We've got debug game editor, development editor, and shipping, and that's just if you're working with the binary version. If you're working with code from GitHub, you're actually going to have even more options here. The one that we want to use during this tutorial is debug game editor. Now that means that we can debug our game code and open the project in the editor. If you were making changes to engine code for some reason, in more advanced coding, then you would just want probably debug editor so that you could debug the engine code in addition to the game code. And then the solution platforms drop down. Right now we just have the Windows option, but if you were going to compile for other platforms, you might want to change something here. So that's ready to go, and we can compile our project. Right-click on its name here in the Solution Explorer, go down to Debug, and Start New Instance. It's going to ask you if you would like to build, say yes, and this first compile is going to take a minute or 2, but future compiles won't take as long when you're just adding a new class or a new function. So we're just going to wait for this to compile, and then it will load in the editor. So now our code is successfully compiled and it's loading in the editor. Now you can see we've got a sort of basic level out here. If I hit play, we can go ahead and start running around because we selected one of those templates to begin with. And so we'll just make a couple tweaks here before we get started adding code to the project. Hit escape to stop playing. And we'll get rid of this template text. I'm just going to drag a couple of materials from the starter content into the level to change the look just a little bit. But the main thing that I'm going to want to do is, from the introduction video, you might have noticed that the character is going to glow or get dim depending on his power level. So in order for that to really stand out in the level, we're going to make the level a lot darker. To do that, we need to go to the directional light and change the rotation of the directional light to 0, 90, 0. And that's a little bit darker, but to really have that sort of nighttime feel, there's a blueprint in here called BP Sky Sphere, and it's included with the template. So if you go to that blueprint and select refresh material, you'll get a nice night sky. So now when we run around in the level, you'll see that it's got a nice nighttime feel, and so when we set up our character to glow, it will really stand out against the level. So we will go ahead and stop playing and save. And that's it for this video. Tune into the next video where I'll add our first code class. Thanks.